Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. We are going to be doing a little dinner prep for tonight. We are going to be making the dough for our Easter bread that we're going to try out, the Italian Easter bread, with the cool braided dyed eggs in it. And then we're going to be prepping some pork butt roast for our dinner tonight. I think I'm going to do kind of a Greek shredded pork. I'm still thinking exactly how it's going to be, but we've got the seasonings down right. So let's get our yeast blooming for our Italian Easter bread. We are going to put 1 tablespoon of active dry yeast into a half a cup of warm milk, and I am using whole milk. So we're going to put 1 tablespoon and a half a cup of warm milk, and then we are going to add in some sugar. We're going to add in a half a cup of sugar. And this is going to help the yeast bloom and get nice and active and foamy. Now, if you don't see that your yeast is like blooming or getting foamy after a few minutes, that means your yeast is dead and you need to get some new one because it won't actually rise. So I'm going to give it a little stir with my fork here, and then we are going to let it chill and let it get nice and foamy. Okay. Let's prep our dinner for tonight. So I've got a pork butt roast that I pulled out of the freezer. I like to get a big, huge bulk pack from Costco. And I am going to cut it up into little chunks here. And we're going to cook it in our Instant Pot with some seasonings. But mine is still a little bit frozen, so that's why I'm cutting it into nicer, smaller chunks so that it will be nice and tender and shredded. That's one thing about the Instapot that's nice is you can take a meat that's frozen and I just put it on the pressure cook high setting and it will be nice and tended and shredded in like 3 hours. So, and I also find if you cut it up into smaller chunks, it gives you a better end thing because you want it to be nice and shredded versus like some tougher chunks. So we're going to cut this up, throw all of these into our Instapot. And this is about 5 pounds of a picnic roast. Again, I buy mine in like the big bulk packs from Costco, and then I cut it up into like I divide it into fourths, so I have 4 5-pound roasts, give or take a couple ounces. So we're cutting through. There we go. So we've got all of our pork roast in here, and so that is in our Instapot. And let me give my hands a quick rinse because we're going to be doing the next step. Okay. So now we are going to dice up 1 onion. So I'm going to cut off the ends, and then we're going to just remove this whole top skin. We're going to cut it down, and then I'm going to just kind of finely dice it up because when we cook it, we're going to steal some of this lovely broth from it to kind of make the nice like flavors and juiciness season. So I don't want to have huge chunks of onions in it so that when it is nice and shredded, you don't have to worry about them in there. There we go. So we've got 1 whole onion. We're going to add it in there. Then we're going to add in 1 whole garlic, 1 whole head of garlic. So this is a head of garlic. We're going to mince it all up. You don't have to do crazy mincing on it since we're just really taking the flavors out. But I'm going to start by cutting off the top. And this is just going to allow me to get to the garlic easier. Now, normally I'm not a big fan of having to do all the work for cutting up garlic, but this is going to let out those really nice flavors and season our meat better than my husband likes to call it, jarlic. So we're just going to first get all of these, and we're just going to kind of peel off this nice, it's like that onion skin. Just going to get that off because we don't want that in there. And if sometimes it's easier if you just cut off from both ends, that way you have a way to kind of peel it off easier. Unfortunately, there's no magic trick to making peeling garlic any easier other than cutting off the tips and the heads and the bottoms. I will say fresh garlic is delicious. It's more potent, but it's a lot of extra work. Hence why I don't use it as often. Although I always have a big bag of garlic in my fridge outside, because when you're making like sourdoughs, like a roasted garlic sourdough, you really need fresh garlic for that. Okay, we're almost there. Got one more. So if you didn't have fresh garlic, this would probably be equivalent to maybe like 2 tablespoons of garlic, of a jar minced ones. And again, we're not going to do a super fine mince on it. We're going to chop it up and then just throw it in there because it's really to let out that nice flavor, really season up that pork. There we go. A few more. Okay. So we've got several cloves of garlic here. I'm going to first start by giving them a little smash. This will help let out some of their juices, and then we're just going to chop over them. And I like to just put them in a pile and like kind of squeezing them back together just like a regular herb and just going over it firmly with my knife. Again, we're not aiming for a small mince, more just like a nice little random chop on it. There we go. And this is a good serving of fresh garlic. We're going to throw that in there. Here we go. And let's check on our yeast and see how it's blooming. I'm going to give my hands a quick rinse. That way we don't transfer any garlic flavor over. But you can see here, if you look in here, we've got a nice foamy top to our yeast. So we've got a good bloom on it, which is what we want. That means our yeast is nice and active. So we are going to start with the rest of the recipe. I'm going to take 3 cups of bread flour. We're going to add them to our bowl here. So 1 and 2. And this is going to be, we're making the dough for our Italian Easter bread, which is a slightly sweet bread with pretty dyed eggs braided into it and then baked, and then you glaze it and add some little sprinkles. So we've got 3 cups of bread flour there. Now, we're going to add in about 1/2 teaspoon of salt. I'm going to give it a little swirl. And then to my yeast over here, we are going to add in a 1/4 cup of melted butter, which is the same as 1/2 stick. I like to add all my wet ingredients together and give them a good mix before I add them into my dry. They just kind of blend better together. We're going to put in 2 eggs. And we will need more eggs later for when we braid our dyed eggs in for it. You know, the pretty little ones. They don't have to be cooked. You don't want them to be cooked or they'll crack even further. But you can just kind of give them a quick dye on them. We are going to whip up our eggs in here. And then we're going to add a teaspoon of vanilla and a teaspoon of almond extract to it. Now, if you like, you could do 1/2 teaspoon of anise extract in it, but I am not a huge fan of anise. I feel like it has a licorice flavor to it. So I'm sticking with just the vanilla and almond, but traditionally you would add some anise in there. But it is not my cup of tea. So we're going to add in a teaspoon of almond extract and a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And that's going to help sweeten up so we have a little bit of sugar in this recipe, but these will also help bring out a nice mild sweetness too. Here we go. So we've got our wet mixture right here, and we are going to add it to our bread flour. So I'm going to make a little well, and we're going to pour it all into this well here. And then I'm going to use my spoon to scrape out any of this sugar that was at the bottom when we poured it into our warm milk. And then I'm going to use my dough whisk. We're going to mix this together, and then we're going to give it a good knead, and then we're going to let it rest for a minute or two, and then we'll knead it again, give it a chance to kind of hydrate the flour. And then we'll let it sit and do about a 90-minute rise. But it has that almond extract smell, which is, I love. It has, it smells like amaretto. It's just so yummy. Okay, we're going to pull this out to get all of this dough out. And here we go. Get it all off here. Don't want any of it to go to waste. And we're going to knead it together. If your dough is a little bit sticky, just give it a bit more flour. Sometimes when you are scooping your bread flour, you might have a little pocket in there. So I'm just going to add a little bit more so it's just a little bit less sticky. I don't want it to stick to the counter too much when I'm kneading it. But you want a nice soft, wet to touch, but you don't want it necessarily to stick to you. And sometimes just adding just a pinch more flour does wonders. Kneading is going to be the key here. The more you knead your bread in the beginning before you do your first rise, the softer and fluffier it will be, because this allows the gluten to develop. There we go. Just going to give it a nice there. And don't feel like you're being rough with it. Really get in there. Give it the nice pull and stretch. There. And my thing is to have a nice countertop, clean. It can be, or a cutting board. And you're just going to literally like push with your hands down and stretch it. So you're like pushing and folding over. That's causing you to stretch. It's like in sourdough, you do the stretch and folds. Essentially, kneading is doing the same thing, except you're doing it against the counter to help really pull it. Okay. There we go. So now we're going to let this sit for a few minutes while we finish up our meat, marinating our meat, and then we'll do our last knead on it. I always like to do a mini knead and then go in there because I feel like it gives out a bit more, makes it a little bit easier to work with. Allows the flour to hydrate some. Okay. So in here on our pulled pork, or our Boston pork roast or butt roast, we have onions, 1 whole yellow onion, and about a head full of garlic chopped up. Now we are going to add about 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. This acidity in this will help give your pork, helps keep it really tender. It will help break down the fat and it'll just be delicious. We have some dried basil here. We're going to add in about a teaspoon of dried basil. There we go. And again, I'm not going to get out my measuring spoons. I'm just going to do my little dump and eyeball it. We're going to put about a half a teaspoon of ground black pepper. And then we have a couple bay leaves. I finally used up my last jar. These must have been really fresh bay leaves because they have a very bright green to them. We're going to put in about 4 bay leaves in here. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4. They smell really nice. They have a very aromatic flavor to it. When we were in Mexico and we went to see one of the Mayan ruins there, or may have been Belize, but they were talking about the trees growing there where the trees for the bay leaves. And I was like, oh, so I could pick these leaves and dry them out and I would have my own bay leaves, which is really cool. We're going to just do a shake of garlic salt over like a teaspoon. And then we've got some fresh herbs that we're going to add up. We've got some oregano. So I'm going to pick out a couple of stalks here. And we're going to take the leaves off of them because I want them to kind of really infuse with the pork too, so that we don't have to like pull out twigs when we're doing it. So just kind of, I always find just like trying to pull, like slide and pull those like leaves off works well. There we go. And this is, again, I'm using some fresh oregano. It's going to be about 1.5 tablespoons of fresh oregano. There we go. And then we're going to use some fresh thyme. There we go. And then we're going to use some fresh thyme. You could use dry and just use about 1 teaspoon of it versus 1 tablespoon. There we go. Just a bit more. And then I'm going to give it a nice mince up so that, you know, they'll be able to sprinkle them out. And then we're going to give a nice toss of our meat in there, our pork with our herbs. And then we're going to cover it with some liquid. So whenever you do like a high pressure cook on your Instapot, you have to add about 1.5 to 2 cups of liquid to it. That way it doesn't burn when it's doing the steam process. I always air and add a little bit more than a thing because I had it once where it like shut off in the middle of the cooking because it was going to burn. And I didn't realize until I went to go and like get my dinner ready and it hadn't cooked any. So always make sure you add a little bit more than enough. They say 1.5. I typically add closer to 2 cups of liquid just so I don't ever have to worry about it like burning onto the bottom and then auto shutting off. So we're going to mince this up nicely. And then we're going to add this in here. Get all of these little scraps right here. And then we're going to add about a teaspoon to 2 teaspoons of liquid smoke. This will just give you that, like, as if you had slow cooked it out on a smoker all day. And a little goes a long way, so you don't want to overdo it with that. We're going to give all this a nice little toss. Try to coat everything. There. And then I'm going to pour in water with a scoop of chicken bouillon. You could use chicken broth if you wanted. And we want about 2 cups. So I'm just going to fill this up. And I like to use like chicken bouillon with it to give it a nice flavor versus straight up water because you want it to flavor the meat. So you could do chicken broth, but again, I find chicken broth's a little flavorless. Okay, so we've got 2 cups of water in there. Now we're going to give it a nice scoop of chicken bouillon. This will also add a little saltiness to it, so it will be seasoned well. There we go. Just mix that in here. Give it a good toss. And so all of those herbs and then the natural juices from the meat will like cook together in high pressure, which will make the pork really tender that it will be falling apart, but it will be in a very aromatic mixture. So everything will have such a nice, strong flavor to it. So let's put our lid on. You want to seal it. And then what I'm doing is I'm just going to do the pressure cooker high. I always have it at 4 hours. I take it out after about 3, but I always keep it set at 4. It's just easier that way than adjusting the time, everyone. Now, let's get back to our dough here. Just going to wash some of those fresh herbs off. And now we're going to do some more kneading. And this is the crucial point, because if you want a nice soft bread, you know, the ones like you get it, you know, a lot of people complain when they try to make homemade bread at home, it turns out stiff or hard, just not nice and fluffy. It's because you're not kneading it enough. So I always say you can't over knead it. You want to really develop the gluten in it, which is going to give it that nice elasticity. And then of course you want to do the proper rising. So We're going to need this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to coat our bowl with oil, and we're going to roll our dough in some oil. That's going to prevent it from, it's going to keep it moist, but it's going to prevent it from sticking to the bowl. And then I'm going to put it in my oven on the bread proof setting, which is about 95 degrees. And we're going to let it rise for about an hour to an hour and a half. And then you get to do the fun shaping where you were going to braid it, and we'll braid the eggs in and do all that fun stuff. And then you got to let it rise again. So there's 2 rises, but then it will be ready to break and it will be delicious. Okay. There we go. We're just about turning it in. And you just want like your bread to be nice and like elasticy where you can stretch it. I always say you want to keep breaking these bonds and pulling it out, because that is going to give you that just delicious tender bread. Okay. We're going to shape it into our little ball. Let me grab a little bit of olive oil here. So we can finally use up the rest of this one. And I just put it right back in that same bowl, even though it's floury or whatnot. Just put a little bit at the bottom. And then you take your ball and you're just going to coat it until you've got it all there. And then roll it around the side so your whole bowl is nice and oily. This is going to allow it to rise and not cling to the bowl. Keep it nice and tender. And then, here, I'll take a clean, just put this up there. So you can take either some saran wrap or cling wrap, put it over, or take a damp towel and put it over your bowl. And then I'm going to put it in my oven at the bread proofing setting, which is at 95 degrees, and it will nice and rise. So we're going to do that for about 90 minutes. Well, guys, we are done with our dinner prep 1. We'll be back in about 2 or so hours, 2.5 hours for the second part, where we'll finish up. We'll cook and turn our shredded pork into a delicious dinner, and we'll bake up our Easter bread. Well, guys, don't forget to make a delicious thing and some homemade naan. So let's get our naan going for our little Greek pita kind of pocket things. So we are going to start out with a cup of sourdough discard. And there we go. We're going to add it in here. We're going to do all of our wet ingredients first, then we will put our flour in. And then we are going to add about 1/2 cup of sour cream. And I'm just going to eyeball my sour cream, but it is 1/2 cup is what we need. So we've got 1/2 cup here. And we need about 1/4 cup of olive oil. So 1 tablespoon, 2 tablespoons, 3 tablespoons, 4. So 1/4 cup. And we're going to give this a good stir, kind of combine everything up. And we're going to add in, do my water now too, 6 tablespoons of water. And this is going to be the wet base for our naan. This is most naan typically uses yogurt, plain yogurt, but I never have plain yogurt in. So we're doing some sour cream, which it always works out just great. I'm going to mix it up. And then we are going to add in some salt, some baking soda, baking powder, and flour. I'm just making sure I get some of these clumps from our things. I'm going to actually switch to my dough whisk now. There we go. So we are going to add in 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. And then 2 teaspoons of salt. So that's 1, 2. And then we need 2 teaspoons of baking powder. I ran out of baking powder, so I made some of my own, which is baking soda, cream of tartar, and cornstarch. So this is a half teaspoon. So we need 4 half teaspoons to make 2 teaspoons. So 1, 3, and 4. We're going to give this a quick stir, and it will actually probably start to bubble up soon because the baking soda and baking powder is going to react with the sour cream and the discard. And you can see it's already getting fluffier and getting thicker and thicker. And that's from that little chemical reaction right there. And then we are going to add in 3 cups of all-purpose flour. So 1, 2, and 3. I'll slide this right out of the way. We're going to give this a good mix, and then we're going to let it sit. This dough does really well when it has a chance to sit for a few minutes. It doesn't need long to sit. You just want to kind of hydrate that flour a little bit. So we're going to mix it up, knead it into our little ball, or like into a big ball, and then divide it, and then we'll let it sit until we're ready to roll them out. Okay. So we've got kind of a stiff shag here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to turn this out onto our countertops and knead it into a nice big ball. And this is going to be for our homemade naan, which we're going to be serving with our Greek shredded pork. And then we're going to make some bacon fried potatoes, a little kind of garnish for our Greek naan using tomatoes, cucumbers, and feta cheese. And we're going to cook up some asparagus in the oven. And we're going to bake up our Italian Easter bread. We had fun making it. It's right now doing its second rise in the oven. And so that will be ready to take out, and we'll just put a nice egg wash on it. But now I'm just going to knead our dough up. Now this naan, it's not like a pita bread. It doesn't have yeast in it, so there is no rising action needing to happen. The baking soda and the baking powder will allow it to puff up. You just want to give it a good knead. I'm picking up all the little flour crumbs that may have fallen out. There we go. And perfect. We're going to now set this to the side, and we are going to just let that flour hydrate. I'm going to give my hands a quick rinse. And we have our oven preheated to 350. Let me take out our Italian Easter bread. It's doing its second rise. So pretty. These are actually uncooked eggs that I dyed, and when we bake it up, they're going to cook them. But we need to give them a quick glaze with some egg water or an egg wash. So I'm going to put about a teaspoon of water in this bowl. Don't need much. And then 1 whole egg. We're going to whip it up, and then we're going to carefully brush it over our braid. Now, when we brush it over, you just want to try avoiding brushing the egg so that the dye doesn't leak. Let's get this mixed up. This egg wash will give it a nice shine when it bakes up, makes it nice and pretty looking. And this is it's called an Italian Easter bread, and it has got a light, mild sweetness with it. I'm not a big fan of anise, so we didn't use anise extract. I used a mixture of vanilla and almond extract. So we are going to brush this all the way around, making sure to kind of get coated everywhere so that it has a nice even shine. So you want to make sure you really get into those creases. Here we go. And then we'll pop this in the oven for about 20 to 25 minutes until it is baked.
You have a question on those actual eggs?
They are real. They are actually raw eggs right now. When they will be hard boiled when we're done baking. But I just dyed them yesterday. Actually, I will say my daughter dyed them yesterday. We dyed a couple eggs. And this is just a fun bread where you get to bake them in it. And then you can technically eat the egg as part of like a breakfast. There we go. So just do one more brush over because you can never have too much. Perfect. Okay. We're going to go pop this in the oven. We're going to bake it at 350 for about, we're going to put it in there for 25 minutes because it is a thicker braid. Right in here. Perfect. And I'm going to set my timer. I'm going to set it for 24 so it gives me a minute to get over here because sometimes I'm in the middle of doing something. And now we can prep up the rest of dinner while we wait for that to bake. I'll just move mine over here. We're going to cut up our bacon here. We're going to use a little bit of our bacon for our potato. So I'm just going to cut this in half. We're going to take out, it's not quite half the bacon, but we'll save a little bit for later in this week. We're going to give this a quick kind of small little chop up. There we go. And then we're going to let it start cooking in the pan. Okay. And so we're going to cook up, and these are going to be our side. We're going to have asparagus, oven roasted asparagus, and bacon fried potatoes for our sides with our Greek pork, shredded pork. And we're going to do those in a little Naan pocket. I'm going to flip my cutting board over, and I'm going to give my knife a quick wash since I don't have any more meat to be cutting. Okay. Got our asparagus over here. Let's prep our asparagus on a baking sheet real quick. We're going to not put them in just quite yet. We'll do them closer towards the end because they only need about less than 10 minutes to bake up, especially since we're doing around 350, so around 10 minutes. So I'll try to do them closer to the end out. When you're using asparagus, you always want to cut off about an inch of the stem. That is going to be very fibrous, and it's going to have dried out from when they were picked, and it's just not good anymore. So you always want to cut them off, otherwise your asparagus won't be tender. It will be chewy and fibrous and no good. So we've got a whole things. I always tell my kids that these are broccoli spears, so they're not asparagus. You know, when they were little, you try to get them to eat different types of vegetables, and broccoli was one vegetable they always ate. So asparagus was broccoli spears, and cauliflower was snowy broccoli, but it was a way I could get them to try things. It was just like shrimp was baby salmon and scallops were salmon balls. It was a way to get them to try just different things, just giving them a slightly different name. And then they were like, oh, these are good. We're just tossing them in that olive oil. You need just about, maybe a teaspoon and a half. You don't need too much olive oil. And then we are going to give it a nice coating of garlic salt, just a sprinkle over. It clings to it fairly well. And then I'm going to grab my pepper over here, which is just hiding. We're going to give it a little pinch over here. A little bit more. And then these will be ready to pop into the oven. So I'm just going to set them to the side for when they're ready to go in there. Let's give our bacon a little bit of a stir here. Here. Want it to break up. And let's get our potatoes now prepped up for dinner. So I'm just going to take a little bit off of each side just to have a little bit less skin in our diced up potatoes, only because my kids don't care for the skin as much. They typically try to pick around it. So if I take off a little bit of it, it means there's more, the less likely to pick it around it. But you can definitely keep the skin on. I'm using russet potatoes, but I will say for skillet fried potatoes, almost all potatoes work well for it. So it's not like, you know, certain dishes where you really need a certain type of potato. But we've got russets. These will fry up nicely. I'm going to do them in a nice kind of small dice to it. And then we'll add a little bit of green onion in towards the end. Okay. Now I'm just going to slice these down. We're going to cube them. Try to make your potato slices all around the same size. There we go. And then after we get done chopping up our potatoes, we're going to make our little kind of tomato and cucumber and not mozzarella, feta cheese, kind of little relish that you can put on top of our little Greek shredded pork. So over in my Instapot earlier today, we put in a picnic roast, or, you know, a butt roast, a pork butt roast. And we seasoned it with, you know, fresh thyme, oregano, basil, a little Worcestershire salt, garlic, onions, and a little chicken broth. And it's been cooking on high pressure for about 2.5 hours. So it should be nice and tender and shred. And when I pick it out, I should be able to shred it really easily. And they'll go in our homemade naan that we're going to cook up in just a second. Now we're waiting for, you want to make sure your bacon gets to a nice, good, like crisp on it before we throw the potatoes in, because the bacon will stop cooking or crisping up. I won't say it will stop cooking, but it will stop getting crispy once you put your potatoes in. So we want to make sure we get a good crispness on that. We've got one more potato to chop up. I'm going to cut this one into 4. Again, I'm trying to get my potatoes all to be around the same size. That way they'll be all nice and tender together. There.
Do you have a question? Do you normally cook and eat this way?
Yes. We typically don't get home from sports until about 7:30, 7:45, depending on traffic. And then I start making dinner pretty much right after that. So we're typically I leave the house around 4:30 with the kids, and I don't get home until 7:30, 7:45. So dinner comes late, but my kids are used to it. We've been eating like this since forever. I actually ate like this as a kid too, because, you know, we had sports and I was one of 10. So we had just late dinners, and it's just normal. It's always been normal for me. So it's not a super weird thing. And I will tell you, if we eat dinner early, my kids are always like around like 8:30, 8:45, what's for dinner? And I'm like, we had it. And they're like, no, that was lunch. And I'm like, no, we just ate dinner at 5:36 today. It's typically whenever my parents eat with us on the weekends. We eat early for them because they're not as late. And my Sundays are typically a little bit more free with sports. Okay, we're going to give them a nice toss in the bacon grease, because that's what's going to make these potatoes delicious. So just make sure you want to get them all coated really quick. And then I'm going to turn my skillet down to about a 7. And once you get your potatoes coated, you're going to let them sit and cook for a minute. You want to minimize the amount of stirring that you do, because you want your potatoes to get a nice crispy edge on it. So now I'm going to just smush them down nice and flat. Okay. Before we prep our little salad, let's get some of our naan cooking up and rolled out over here. I'm going to start warming up my skillet, because it always takes a hot minute before the skillet is ready. Let's grab my dough here. It's hydrated well. Here's got my Instapot. This is You can see the nice steaming pork in there and all its lovely, delicious seasonings. That's what we're going to be having on our naan. Let me grab my pastry cutter. Makes it just a little bit easier. So we're going to cut these, and then we're going to make 8 kind of, I would like to say they're big, but they're never as big as I always think they are, but a good like kind of plate size naan. And then we'll just roll it up into a little ball. That way it just turns out a little bit more round. But again, you don't have to, these don't have to rise because it uses baking soda and baking powder. And the discard and the sour cream keeps them really tender and moist. So we're just going to roll them out. And you don't need to roll them out like super thin. Just because they're not a tortilla, they're going to puff up some. So you don't want to roll them out super, super thin. So we've got our first one here. It's kind of, I want to say, I wouldn't know what the, like thickness of cardboard, like thick cardboard. And we're going to let this one start to cook. You don't need to put any butter or anything on it. Remember, we added olive oil into the batter or the dough for it. So we're just going to let it slow cook. I'm going to grab my cutting board over here so we can pull this out on it. When they're ready, I'll put them on there when they're cooking. We're going to let those cook and up while we prep the rest, because they're kind of like a boring thing to watch. They're like a sit and the wait game. We're going to make I'm pulling up my ingredients here. So just a Roma tomato and some baby cukes and some feta cheese. And this is going to be a little relish that we can top on our little shredded pork naan. And then we're going to make a little kind of garlic aioli. Since these are baby cucumbers or English cucumbers, you don't need to peel the skins. Their skins are very tender, which I love. So we're just going to chop off the ends, and then we're going to give them just a little bit of a dice here. And cut these off. This will just give a nice little fresh little brightness to our little Greek kind of pocket here, which is nice with the pork is a bit more heavy. And this kind of plays on those nice Mediterranean flavors. And then we are going to add in a Roma tomato. Let's see, I'm going to cut this into thirds. And just nice, again, small little bite-sized pieces. Almost as if you were making like a kind of a chutney or a thick salsa. If you had cherry tomatoes, you could quarter some cherry tomatoes and those would work well. And then we're going to throw in some feta cheese, which will add a nice, the feta cheese is just a really like bright cheese, I will say. You really notice it. It has like a strong flavor, but it's not, I don't know, my 9-year-old absolutely loves feta cheese. She always gets disappointed when she thinks feta cheese is on a salad and it turns out to be blue cheese, because she does not like blue cheese. But she'll pick out all the tomatoes and all the cucumbers out of this. Let's get a little spoon to stir it up. Here we go. So this will just toss right on our things, and I'm just going to dress it with a little bit of balsamic glaze, which is balsamic vinegar that has been reduced down, and it has just a little bit of sweetness, but it gives a nice little acidity to it and another layer, like flavor complexity, which is nice. Okay, there we go. I'm going to flip my naan over. I'm going to give these a nice flip. You can see how we've got the nice little crust forming on the potatoes. That's from not constantly stirring them. You just got to try your best to avoid stirring your plate or your potatoes. Just flip them and then let them rest. Here we go. Keep all that bacon in there. And then I'm going to, again, push them down. And we're going to now put our asparagus in the oven real quick. And we can take a nice peek at our Easter bread while we're over there. A quick peek, because we don't want it to let out too much heat. They say every time you, I don't even need this, every time you open the oven, it drops yours about 10 degrees. But look how nice and puffy and big it has raised up. It looks gorgeous. We have about 10 minutes on that. Gonna grab myself some, where's my onion powder? Here it is. Want to use this on my things. I have a crazy spice cabinet. I have so many containers and there's just no good way to organize them, because if you have a lot of spices, you can never see them. And I think I have maybe 30 or 40 different spice containers, so it gets a little crazy in there.
You have a question, what did you drizzle on the cucumbers and tomatoes?
That was a balsamic glaze. So it's essentially a reduction of balsamic vinegar, and it has a little bit of sweetness to it. So, but it's more of a kind of a tangy acidity that's reminiscent of balsamic vinaigrette. Okay, roll this guy out. Nice. And then we're going to put him right here. So I'm going to chop up my onions real quick for our potatoes. We're going to add onion powder and garlic salt, but we're not going to add those towards the end. But I will add in the whiter parts of my green onions first, because those, I feel like you need to cook them up just a little bit, while the green stalky parts at the end are much better for garnish. But the white and the brighter white ones, definitely throw them in a few minutes before your potatoes are done. That way they kind of cook out some of that more astringent onion flavor to it. So let's put these in. Got that. And we're going to make our little sauce now. Get all my ingredients. So we're going to have our Greek pork. It's seasoned in some Greek flavors. And then I'm going to make kind of a garlic pesto aioli to go with it. So we're going to use about a nice, I want to say 2 tablespoons of mayo. Always use full fat mayo. Light mayo just is not good. Let's see. There we go. And then we're going to put in a little bit of pesto. You don't need a little pesto goes a long way. So about, I want to say, a teaspoon or so. You don't need too much.
Yeah, question, what type of potatoes?
These are just bacon fried potatoes with a little bit of green onions and onion salt in it. Oh, russet potatoes. They are russet potatoes. So I find russet potatoes fry up really well. We're going to put about 2 tablespoons of cream in there. We're going to put about a teaspoon of garlic, or jarlic, as my husband says. And we're going to then just smush these together, mix together, and then we're going to squeeze some fresh lemon juice over it. But when you're doing this, you want to just make sure you try to smush that garlic as much as possible. That's going to give the flavor. It's going to make it less mild it out, but make it more evenly spaced in our aioli versus just in the like the garlic, pieces. So we have that. Now we're going to just add a little bit of lemon juice. You don't need a lot, but you want it in there to add just a nice little happiness. So I use probably 1/4 of a lemon. And beautiful. So we've got our aioli that will drizzle over our things.
Yeah, question. Did you learn to cook in France?
I did not learn to cook in France. I actually have no classical training when it comes to cooking. I am just self-taught. I started cooking for my family when I was 13 years old. I took over that chore. It was the best chore too, because you got to pick what to eat and paid the most out of all the other jobs. And so I started doing that when I was 13. And I loved it, cooking. And my parents, I will say, were really great. They fostered it. They like we'd go to Williams and Sonoma and they'd buy me all the cool stuff and we'd try cool recipes. They got me like fine cooking and gourmet cooking magazines because I guess they benefited.
It's paid dividends for them now.
I know. And I still cook for my parents. I cook all of their meals. So they come over every single day and get food. So they're winning at life too. So, and they always buy me all of my cooking supplies that I need. So it's like, it's a way I can help them out because they're very busy and with work and their jobs, and I get to do what I love. And I will say my parents are like me. They eat anything and everything under the sun, versus I will say my children, especially my 9-year-old, can be a bit of a food critic. But I will say my 15-year-old, she's really turned a page, and she's starting to eat everything, try everything. And so is my 13-year-old. My little ones, they eat everything because they know different. But right now, it's my 9-year-old. Every time she's like, ugh, what are we having for dinner? Ugh. And this, but then she would be like, what would you like for dinner? And she would be like, can I have salmon and hummus and butter noodles, or spaghetti and meatballs? Those would be the two things she would ask for dinner all the time. I'm like, well, we can't eat that every single day. And she loves steak. She would eat steak all the time. Okay, let's get a coating of seasonings on our potatoes. So we're going to this is some onion powder. We're going to put about, I want to say, a teaspoon on here. So a good couple of shakes. This is going to give you a nice onion flavor without having to have the full onion cut up in there. Let me grab my garlic salt and my pepper. We're going to get a good, about a teaspoon of garlic salt. You don't need as much salt in this because you do have the bacon that adds a bit of saltiness to it. And then, of course, nice pinch of pepper. And then I'm not going to mix them in yet. I'm going to let them keep frying, and then we'll mix them in. I always add my spices towards the end of their cooking so that it doesn't burn and stick to the bottom of the pan. There we go. Turn this down. Now our bread should be coming out soon, so let me make our glaze real quick for our bread. Just slide this up here. And then I had to dig through and find some sprinkles that will be Easter themed. I'm really not one to want to buy, well, I love buying themed things, but I've been trying to be less materialistic and get less themed things before I use up all the stuff I have. So we're going to use about a cup of powdered sugar. And we're going to put in about, I want to say a half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. You could use almond extract too if you want. And where did my cream go? Let me grab my fork, because I find the best way to kind of mix your frosting together is with a fork. We're going to just put in a little bit of cream, and then we'll add some more until we have the right consistency. You could also use milk or half and half. They all make it. Cream will give you a richer kind of glaze and then milk will give you a thinner, clearer glaze. So it's just really what what you would like. So now what we've got is kind of a thick paste. This is what I would consider good for a cinnamon roll, but we want it a little bit thinner on ours. So we're going to let it sit here while I get our next naan on. You see how quick these naan make up? And they're way better than store-bought. So, and they're way better than pita bread, I will tell you that. I'm not a huge fan of pita bread. I find it's kind of dry. And maybe I just haven't had really good pita bread. But even when I made it homemade, I just prefer naan over it. And I think it's because that sourdough discard in it and that yogurt just makes it delicious. Okay, our oven is calling us. I'm going to give our potatoes a quick stir, and then we're going to head over and grab our Easter bread out of there, and we'll check on our asparagus. But we're kind of hitting down to the home run. Okay, got that. Now we're going to head to our oven. I'm going to grab myself a trivet while we're here. That's why I always put an extra minute on there so that we know. Look at it, it is gorgeous. Put my oven mitts on. And I'm going to just put my asparagus up here. They need about 1 more minute, so we'll grab them in just a second. But look at this gorgeous Easter. This is Italian Easter bread. It's a sweet bread with dyed eggs baked into it. But it is absolutely gorgeous. I think it's called, I can't even, I'll butcher it, but it is the Italian Easter bread. I feel like a Greeks make one. There's a bunch of different versions of it, but it is flavored with almond and vanilla, and it's just mildly sweet and brushed with an egg wash, which gives you that nice shiny crust. And then we're gonna dress it with some glaze and some sprinkles for a full-on effect, but I'm excited for this. Okay, let's check on. That's almost done. Let's get our glaze to the right second, because I do like to glaze it when it's warm so that it melts over it and really coats it. You know, it's like your donuts. You want to glaze them when they're nice and hot. Okay, we're getting here. Again, we need it to be brushable. This is very thick, so we want it a little bit thinner. And I will say I follow a strict recipe when it comes to like making my frostings. It's typically like the visual. Once it hits that, like the texture and the feel, then I know it's right. Okay, there we go. This is kind of like Elmer's glue, because when we put it on and while it's hot, it will continue to melt it more. So let's see if we've got, do I have any yet? Yes, excellent. I was hoping I had another one of these. So we're gonna brush this over our thing. So here we go.
You have a question, is that regular milk that's in the glaze?
This is cream. Now you can use regular milk or half and half. I find cream gives you a much richer tasting glaze. I think it's just a little bit nicer. Whole milk or like regular milk will give you a thinner glaze. So it's really preference, but I prefer whole milk, or I prefer cream or half and half to it. Give a nice little coating, let it drizzle all around.
Yeah, a couple questions about the eggs. Can you just go over?
Yes, so these are dyed eggs. When we put them in, they were raw. And so I just dyed them, just putting them in like food coloring and a little bit of vinegar to keep the color on, but not hot. And then when you bake them up, they make them actually hard boiled. So they're cooked all the way through now. So you can, traditionally what you would do is you take the bread, you'd break it, and then you'd also eat the egg. So now we're gonna jazz it up with some sprinkles. We're gonna try to do a nice thing. I had to find as best Easter colors as I could. So here we've got some purple, and we need some pink, and I'll do a little orange. Do I have any light green? I do over here. And then we'll put some little perils, which are those small, like pearl-like ones. So this one's kind of a collection. I told you I had a weird collection. I had Halloween and I had Christmas, and then I don't even know why I have pink and green, but I had a weird collection. So you've got those on there. So you have those fun little Easter ones. And then these are the little pretty ones that give you that nice little pop. And voila, we have our Italian Easter bread, which is a mildly sweet bread that we glazed with a nice vanilla glaze, and it will just be delicious for dessert tonight. Okay. Let's cover this, and then I'm gonna roll this out, then we're gonna grab our asparagus out, and I'll be able to plate up and show you how we're gonna eat dinner tonight. Just gonna get my last little naan, one of my naans rolled out. And then we'll get our pork out and our asparagus. Here we go. That cooking. And now I'm going to go grab our asparagus out of the oven real quick.
You have a question? Will kids eat the eggs on the bread?
Yeah, actually, like 3 of my kids really love hard-boiled eggs. So they will definitely eat them. They love cracking them. I think when you expose kids to things when they're younger, they're more willing to eat it. And so most of my kids really like it. Now, some of them will only eat the yolk or will only eat the whites, but they do like it. We always called them dinosaur eggs for the longest time. And so, because when they like to dye them, they like to crack them a little bit. And then when you dye them, they soak them and they make little crack dyes. So they're pretty cool looking. Okay, let me clear this out of the way. We can get our pork over here and we can plate up dinner. Okay. So I had this cooking in my Instapot. See if this is still hot. Should be good. Grab that under. Keep that on there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some tongs and use my tongs to shred the meat in here more. And it should be like, as you can see, it's just going to completely fall apart in there, which is what we want. And this has like all those really good, delicious seasonings in it. So I like to keep my pork in there as long as possible because it keeps it nice and moist and tender. And then when we're ready to serve, you give it a good shake. Okay, let me get a plate and we are going to serve up. Okay, turn off my potatoes. So let's start out. We've got our naan right here. So this is our homemade sourdough discard naan. And then we're going to fill it up with our shredded pork. And we need to add a little bit.
Where are you located at?
We are just south of Nashville, so in Tennessee. Got our garlic aioli on. Where did my spoon go? We'll use my spatula here. Put a nice of our tomatoes and feta and cucumbers. So we've got our sandwich there. So you'll eat it like a pocket, just like that. And then, of course, we're going to add some of our fried potatoes. And let's not forget our delicious asparagus, which is nice and bright and green, which is the perfect one. So let me put it right here so you guys can see it a little better. So here is our dinner tonight. We have our homemade naan using sourdough discard topped with our shredded Greek pork. We made a delicious tomato, cucumber, and feta cheese relish. And then we fried up our potatoes with bacon and we roasted our asparagus in the oven with garlic and pepper. And of course, let's not forget for dessert, we're going to be having our traditional Italian Easter bread. I'm really excited for that. It looks delicious. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to show you what we're cooking for our family, what we're making. Hopefully you guys learned something along the way. Again, all of our videos get posted on the link on our page, so that was probably the quickest way that you can find the recipes to remake. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe.